The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show. Yeah!
Hi, welcome to the Pool Guy Podcast Show. In this episode, I'm going to go over some saltwater truth and myths for you, and I'm going to cover just about everything you need to know about the saltwater system or saltwater generator for your pool. So if you're thinking about adding a salt system to your pool or having a pool built and adding a salt system, this podcast should be helpful to you. Leslie's Pool Supplies is a proud partner of the Pool Guy Podcast Show. Leslie's Pool Supplies has been do-it-yourselfers and pool trade professionals' trusted partner since 1963, providing quality products and services to make pool care easy and solutions and expertise to do it right. One of the things that's often surprising is how much salt needs to be added to a pool to convert it over to a saltwater system. So for example, if you have a 14,000 gallon pool, typically you may be adding 10 bags of the 40-pound bags of salt. And it seems like a lot of salt is being added to the pool, but in effect, it's a lot less saltier than even a tear, and definitely much less saltier than the ocean. So even though it appears like a lot of salt is being added to the water, 14,000 gallons and the amount of salt you're putting in there is more of an illusion than anything else. So the first myth that I'll tackle is one that I'm always mentioning. So if you've listened to this podcast or seen my videos, you know that one of the things that a lot of people say is that the saltwater pool is not a chlorine pool. And that's just not true. It's just a different way of it adding the chlorine to your pool. It's basically taking the salt, putting it through the saltwater generator and converting it into chlorine. So one way to look at it is when they make liquid chlorine at the factory, this is how they actually make the liquid chlorine. And so that's what's happening when you're having a saltwater generator at your pool producing the chlorine. It's just producing it in a more cleaner fashion, and it makes it more convenient. You don't have to worry about going to the pool store, buying gallons of liquid chlorine or bags of shock or dry chlorine. You're adding it directly into the pool with the saltwater system running, and this eliminates handling of all the chemicals. It also will eliminate raising the cyanuric acid level in your pool because the saltwater generator does not add any cyanuric acid to the pool. So if you're using tablets, 3-inch trichlor tablets or dichlor, or any product that adds cyanuric acid to your pool, going to a saltwater system is really ideal because you're not adding any of the cyanuric acid to the pool as it's generating the chlorine for the pool. And one more note about how the saltwater generator generates the chlorine, or actually the amount of chlorine that it generates, is dependent on how fast the pool pump is running. So if you have a variable speed pump and you're not running it at the full speed, and also how long the pool is running is also a factor in how much chlorine the saltwater system will actually generate for your pool. So it varies. There's a lot of variables involved in calculating how much chlorine is actually being produced. But if you were to run a typical saltwater system, let's say the Pentair iChlor 30, and if you were to run that for 24 hours at a full single speed pump speed of 3450 RPMs, typically it'll make about 1 pound of chlorine or so, which is equivalent to 1 gallon of liquid chlorine. So these systems actually generate a lot of chlorine over the course of time as they're running, and you can kind of get the idea that they're highly effective. Most saltwater pools will not have any algae problems, any problems with cloudy water, because it's constantly producing chlorine in the pool. And I touched a little bit at the beginning on how people think that the salt in your pool is very salty, but basically, like the ocean is 35 parts per million of salt. A human tear is about 6,000 parts per million, and most saltwater pools will operate at 3,000 to 3,400 parts per million. So you can barely even taste the salt in the water in most cases. So a saltwater pool does not make your pool like the ocean when you're using it. So definitely that's one myth that I hear all the time, is that the saltwater pool is just too salty. You don't want to swim in it because you don't want to swim in the ocean. But technically, the amount of salt in there, again, is less than the salt that you would find in your tear, and 10 times less than what you would find in the ocean. I think one of the biggest myths that you see propagated by maybe those in the industry that are selling saltwater systems, and of course for the manufacturers of the saltwater systems, is that by getting a saltwater system, you're going to save money on your pool care, when in actuality or reality, it's actually the opposite. You're going to actually spend more money with a saltwater system than if you didn't have one. For example, initially purchasing the unit, if you get a decent, reputable unit, you're going to pay close to $800 or $900 for it, and the installation could be anywhere from $200 to $300 to $400 depending on how hard it is to install it at your particular equipment pad. So let's say that you get a salt system, have it installed, so that's $1,200 right there. Then you got to purchase the initial salt to charge the pool. Each bag of salt is roughly $10, and if you need 12 bags, that's $120. So now you're at $1,300 right there. And then every 3 or 4 years, you're going to have to replace the salt cell. Depending on the brand, the salt cell could be $500 or $700. And so in the course of 5 years, let's say, your cost of the saltwater pool is close to $2,000 with the cost of the replacement cell, the initial salt to charge the water, maybe 1 or 2 bags every season to recharge the water, and the initial cost of the salt system plus the install. So over the first 5 years of having the saltwater system, that equates to about $400 a season. So are you going to spend $400 on a chlorine in one season? Doubtful. If you're using tablets, you may buy a bucket of the trichlor tablets, a 50-pound bucket for maybe $120. And then if you're buying liquid chlorine or shock, I doubt if you're going to spend $280 in the season on those particular, on that level of chlorine. So it's definitely not going to save you money. So get that out of the equation right away. It's going to cost you more money. What it does save you, which I think is one reason to go with the saltwater pool, it saves you time and energy, and also it allows you to maintain your pool much easier with the saltwater system because you eliminate the need to add chlorine to your pool from the equation. And so all you have to worry about are the other chemicals associated with your pool care, and you don't have to really worry about purchasing chlorine and making sure that the chlorine doesn't zero out in the pool, because technically the saltwater pools usually run higher on the chlorine side versus lower in the chlorine side, and so you don't have to worry about the chlorine factor, which in a lot of cases will translate into money saving, because if your pool never runs out of chlorine or zeroes out, as we call it in the industry, you're not going to need to shock your pool. You're not going to need to buy algicides to treat the algae in the pool, and the pool will be swim ready most of the time. We won't have cloudy water issues, and so the saltwater pool pays off in other areas of pool care and of course in pool usage that it wouldn't pay off, of course, financially, as far as if you're trying to equate it with the amount of chlorine you're going to spend versus how much you're going to spend on the initial salt system, and the course of a 5-year period is the way I calculated the cost here. I think it's pretty much really hard to justify buying the saltwater system to save money. It just makes your life more convenient. And I don't want you to think that I'm discouraging you from buying a saltwater system by highlighting the fact that you don't save money with the saltwater system. I have one on my pool, and I recommend it to my customers all the time. The ones that can afford the conversion, I definitely recommend doing the saltwater system. If you're having a pool constructed, if the builder gives you the option between ozone, UV, or salt, you probably don't need all three on your pool, but if he gives you an option between those, I would definitely say go with the saltwater system and not the UV and ozone, because I think the saltwater system will benefit you more going forward. Definitely would recommend having one installed because of the convenience factor. And again, it just takes one of the things out of the equation for your pool care. One very important thing, by the way, because the chlorine level in your pool is really critical to keeping your pool well balanced and algae free. Another myth that I often hear is that the saltwater system, the salt in the pool, will destroy your equipment, destroy your decking. All these kind of things are related to the fact that salt is corrosive. And believe me, all these years of using salt, putting it in the back of my truck, I do actually have a hole in the bed of my truck from the corrosion from the salt. If you have a house by the ocean, you know that everything deteriorates by the ocean. Your wrought iron fences, your televisions, underneath your car. So the salt definitely is highly corrosive. But the amount of salt in the pool will not cause any damage to the equipment if you keep it at below the 3,500 parts per million. I think you can probably go up to 4,000 parts per million without causing any damage to the equipment. It's not going to cause a problem because there's such a low level of salt in the pool that you're not going to have that kind of problem. So I would definitely say that in majority of cases, unless the salt level gets out of control, there's not going to be any deterioration of your deck or the pool surface itself or the equipment itself. So the salt is not destructive to the pool equipment. If it was that way, the saltwater systems would not be installed anymore. And this definitely is not an issue that you need to worry about. As long as you keep the salt level within range of the saltwater generator itself, you're not going to have any problem with parts corroding and things like that happening. So again, the salt system does not destroy your equipment. The only exception to that is if you have a lot of copper piping in your system. And if you do have a lot of copper piping, depending on where it's at, you may not be able to put a salt system in. If you have a above ground pool with a metal frame, definitely don't want to put a saltwater system in there. I mentioned how at the beach the wrought iron fences will be deteriorated by the salt. Same thing with any kind of metal parts like the metal frames in a above ground pool. So definitely don't want to use that salt in those occasions where there's copper plumbing or a lot of copper plumbing. You can get away with some copper plumbing still in your system, and definitely not any kind of metal framed above ground pool. Before I get too far away from the benefit of the saltwater system making your pool care more convenient by eliminating the need for you to purchase chlorine and add it to your pool, there is actually a downside to the saltwater generator, and that is that it actually will increase your pH level sometimes quite rapidly in your pool to levels that you probably have never seen before in your pool. So if you have a chlorine pool right now, if you're using tablets, your pH probably rarely will get above 7.8 because the tablets have acid in them, and so it's constantly giving you a dose of acid added to the water. But when you switch over to salt and remove the tablets from your pool, you're going to see a dramatic increase in the pH level in your pool. And that's because as the saltwater generator is working, it actually will raise the pH in the pool. There's a lot of chemistry behind that, but basically, if you have a saltwater pool, if you do pool service and you have saltwater pools in your route, you'll know that the pH will get up to 8.2, 8.4, into that range. So although you're not putting chlorine in the pool, you're going to find yourself adding either dry acid or muriatic acid to your pool a lot more often to keep the pH from going so high in the pool. And it goes pretty extreme. It's pretty amazing how high the pH can go in a saltwater pool and how hard it is to lower the pH down. And you're going to be using a lot more muriatic acid or dry acid in your pool with a saltwater generator running in your pool. So that's one thing that you need to be aware of, is that it's going to affect the pH in your pool. So there are a lot of people that don't like saltwater pools for that reason. They say that the benefit of not adding chlorine or going to purchase chlorine, the fact that the pH rises so rapidly outweighs those benefits. There are ways to counter the high pH in your pool. One really effective way to do this is to add a borate product to your pool. And the borate, one of the side benefits of adding borates to your pool to 30 to 50 parts per million is that it buffers the pH. So alkalinity is a pH buffer. So I'll give you an example with alkalinity. If the alkalinity in your pool is at 200 and you add a quart of acid in your pool to lower the pH down, the pH is going to drop maybe for the first hour, and then in the second hour you're going to see it back up to where it was, because the high alkalinity at 200 is going to buffer the pH and keep it from lowering down. On the other side, if the alkalinity is at 40 and you add a quart of acid to your pool, the pH, if the pH was at 8.0, it may drop down to 7.2 or 7.0 because there's nothing that will buffer the pH in the pool, and so it'll become more acidic quicker with a lower alkalinity. So the way the borate product works in your pool is that it's actually a pH buffer, which means that with the borate in your pool, the pH is not going to bounce up and down greatly because it's another buffer added to the water along with the alkalinity in the pool. So that's one reason why before you add the borate product, you want to make sure that the pH and alkalinity are balanced, because after you add the borate product, it becomes more difficult to move the alkalinity and pH in a different direction because the borate is a really highly effective pH buffer for your pool. So if you have a saltwater generator and you're tired of adding tons of acid to your pool, definitely look at adding some borate to your pool. You can add borates in many different ways. There are a lot of pre-made products out there. You have the BioGuard Optimizer, the Protein Supreme, and then you can, of course, add boric acid to your pool or the 20-multein borax to your pool. So these are all different ways to introduce the borates into the pool water. One reason I like borates also is that once you add it to the pool, it's a lot like cyanuric acid where it doesn't evaporate. And so every season you'll just be adding a maintenance dose to your pool. And again, one of the side benefits of the borate in the water is that it's a pH buffer, and this will help the pH from rising rapidly as the saltwater generator is running in your pool. Another common misconception about saltwater systems is that once you put one in, you can set it and forget it. It's going to generate the chlorine all season long. You're not going to have any issues with it. But in truth, one of the things that you have to really keep an eye on is the plates in the salt cell building up any kind of calcium on them. The way the saltwater generator works is that these plates are what the electricity is conducted through, basically, that does the conversion. And if there's calcium on there, it's going to kind of, I would say in a way, short circuit this process. And in some cases, depending on how much calcium is built up, it could actually short circuit the salt system. I know a lot of the Pentair iChlor cells, the fuse will blow when there's a lot of calcium. I guess the electricity will arch because of the calcium buildup. But definitely that's one of the problems you're going to have with a saltwater system is calcium buildup on the plates, depending on if your area has hard water or not. In my area, I clean my salt cell every 3 months because the calcium really builds up on the plates where I'm at. Your area may not have the same problem. So there is some maintenance with the saltwater system, and that is making sure that the salt cell is clean and clear of calcium. And in your area, again, it may be different, but typically every 3 months, you should give your salt cell an acid bath, and I have a lot of videos covering different salt systems and how to clean them. As far as the controller itself, most of them are highly reliable. You're not going to have any problems with the power units with the salt systems. The only issue you're going to have is with calcium building up on the plates, causing the salt system not to produce chlorine. And then you'll know this right away when you test the water and the chlorine level is at 0. A lot of salt systems will have a red light indicating when the cell is dirty. The Hayward systems have a flashing light that says inspect cell, and then that indicates that the cell has some buildup on it. The Pentair systems will flash when the salt cell is dirty. So the salt systems are smart enough to know when they're not working, but it's your job to go out there and check it to make sure that it's actually working or not. So that's definitely one of the drawbacks of the saltwater system, that is not one of those things where you can just set it and forget it. You have to do some maintenance with the salt cell itself to prevent the calcium buildup, or to check for the calcium buildup and clean it when you do see the calcium building up on the plates. I like the Jandy True Clear cell that I have on my house because it has a clear top, and I can inspect the cell at any time by just looking inside there and seeing if there's any calcium on the plates. One of the advantages of having a salt system with a clear cell or clear chamber is you can see the calcium buildup very easily without having to take the salt cell off the plumbing and inspect it that way. I know there's a lot of people that say that the salt in the pool makes the water feel softer, and that may be true in a lot of circumstances. It does have a different feel to it. I think it is a much cleaner way to run your pool because you're not adding the trichlor tablets, you're not adding a lot of shock to your pool. You're letting the saltwater generator basically make the chlorine for you. So definitely is a more effective way to add the chlorine to your pool. Again, one of the great benefits I think of a saltwater pool is that you don't have to add a chemical with cyanuric acid in it to your pool to maintain the chlorine in the pool. So you do need cyanuric acid in the pool with a saltwater pool, and the acceptable level is anywhere from 30 to 80 parts per million. A lot of people will say that 30 to 50 parts per million is the standard, but there's a lot of new research out saying that 80 parts per million is probably closer to what you need to be at in a saltwater pool because of the way the salt water is generated. It's not generated all the time, only when the salt system is running and only when it's running at the set percentage. So for instance, if you have a pentar cell and you're running your pool 8 hours a day, but you have your cell set at 50% production, that means that the salt cell is going to be running only 4 hours a day, which means it's going to make probably less than a quart of liquid chlorine while it's running in your pool at half the output, 50% output, plus only running 8 hours a day. So those are all factors that go into the new kind of equation to where you're going to need to add more cyanuric acid to the pool to protect the chlorine residual from the sun's UV rays, because unlike adding liquid chlorine or having tablets in the floater in your pool or inline chlorinator, it's not gonna add a consistent residual chlorine level to the pool all the time, only when the saltwater generator is running. And therefore, with the higher cyanuric acid level in the pool, it'll protect the chlorine longer and will allow you to have a higher level of chlorine protected also. So I mentioned that saltwater generators produce a lot of chlorine in some cases, so if it is producing a lot more than 3 parts per million during that day, maybe that particular day it has 6 parts per million of chlorine putting into your pool, the higher cyanuric acid level will protect that level from the sun's UV rays and kind of carry that over into the next day for you, if that makes sense. So kind of like if you have a data plan and you can carry over the minutes to the next month, the same thing if the conditioner is protecting a higher chlorine level in your pool, it'll carry that over to the next day. Versus if you had your cyanuric acid level really low in a saltwater pool, the UV rays will burn off the chlorine very rapidly. So if you do have a saltwater pool and it's not holding, definitely check the cyanuric acid level. It's called the conditioner level also, and known as the CYA level. So check that to make sure that you do have the appropriate amount in your pool to protect the chlorine. So you'll still need that in your saltwater pool. You may not need anything else besides the conditioner. You won't need phosphate treatments. You may not need any kind of chlorine enhancers because the saltwater generator will be constantly producing chlorine while it's running in your pool. So that eliminates a lot of other chemicals that you would normally need to put in your pool. And so there's another benefit with the saltwater system is that you're going to add a lot less chlorine enhancers and chemicals to your water because it's really effective of chlorinating the pool on a continuous basis. And I do have quite a few series of podcasts on saltwater systems. I have a blog article listing all of my podcast episodes. You can also find a link to this on my website, swimmingpoollearning.com. On the homepage, I have a link to all the podcasts that I've done by subject, and you can see all the saltwater podcasts that I've done, saltwater pool podcasts I've done, and refer to those to pick the appropriate saltwater system and just to learn more about saltwater systems in general from that list of different podcasts that that I've recorded on saltwater systems. I've also filmed some YouTube videos on saltwater systems, of course, and cleaning the saltwater cells. And so you can find a lot of this on my YouTube channel also in my saltwater pool playlist. So my website is swimmingpoollearning.com, and you can go there to find some links to different salt systems as well as to the other podcasts on saltwater pools. And if you do pool service for a living, you may definitely benefit from my coaching program. For $10 a month, you can text me, and for $20 a month, you can call me. Plus, there's a lot of other great discounts and benefits for being part of the group. You can learn more about that at poolguycoaching.com. Thanks for listening to this podcast. Have a great rest of your week, and God bless. Leslie's Pool Supplies has been do-it-yourselfers and pool trade professionals' trusted partner since 1963, providing quality products and services to make pool care easy and solutions and expertise to do it right.